All right, man, peace. So, Just Retarded Smith, aka J.R. Smith, decided that he's going to throw his name into the Michael Jordan versus LeBron James debate. He was interviewed at the LeBron James sponsored Uninterrupted, hosted by Victor Cruz, and he stated that he believes that LeBron James has surpassed Michael Jordan since quote unquote 3 years ago, which I guess synchronizes with LeBron James quote unquote leading the Cleveland Cavaliers back from down 3-1 against the 73-9 Golden State Warriors team. Anyway, they're going to talk about it, I'm going to chime in.
MJ, the greatest of all time,
Yes, we already know that.
in my opinion, up until
LeBron James got you that new contract, right? Half-baked Smith. This dude represents everything that I talk about when it comes to weed heads, man. And a lot of brothers get mad at me when I castigate quote-unquote marijuana and its usage. Why do I castigate it? It's not the weed itself, because you can actually take weed, aka marijuana, and other herbs for healing. You're supposed to ingest the herb. But when you're smoking it, number one, you're defiling your lungs because you're only supposed to allow oxygen in your lungs. But beyond that, the most important thing is that in the condition that our people are in, particularly so-called black men, you're talking all this shit about revolution and all this bullshit, but you can't even think clearly because you smoked out on that shit. And J.R. Smith is a very good example of that, and not because he's picking LeBron James over Michael Jordan. We all know why he's doing that. He has to do that. He knows that LeBron James is very sensitive, and he needs everyone in his corner. Everyone on his team has to be his cheerleader. We know that. It is what it is. And plus, J.R. Smith's future in the NBA is directly linked with LeBron James. J.R. Smith is LeBron James away from being in the developmental league. He could possibly get a contract with another team in the NBA, but there's not much difference between J.R. Smith and Nick Young right now. Like, literally, he could be Swaggy P. He's really only in the league because of his name. But he represents everything that I talk about when it comes to weed smoking, and a lot of cats get upset with me when I talk about it. And that shows me something. If that activates a lot of so-called black men that come on my channel. Because at the end of the day, you can't lead anybody anywhere high off of weed. I don't give a fuck who you are. Your brain is all foggied up, man. So, sorry. Nah. And he is an excellent example of that.
2 years ago. And I was with Rayon by far. But the last couple of years, at 33 years old.
Big deal. Jordan at 33 years old, averaged 30 a game, shot 50% from the field. The Bulls won 72 games in the championship. Next.
Averaging a triple-double a whole month going.
Russell Westbrook averaged a triple-double for the whole year. So, by that definition, if you're using that as criteria, Russell Westbrook is the greatest player of all time. Next.
Walking into the playoffs, I mean.
Look at Victor Cruz. He needs to get his ass back out there on the track and on the football field. Stop shaking his head in the studio, trying to act like he's a media member.
I mean, just hit 31,000 points the other day. Hit 30,000 points earlier this year.
What LeBron James is trying to do is create an echo chamber for himself. He's utilizing a lot of, to be quite frank with you, CIA tactics, making sure that he has propaganda outlets strategically placed at different stations, meaning television stations, cable stations, radio stations. We think that LeBron James is the new greatest ever, and he's leading that army. He's at the vanguard of that movement of LeBron James is the greatest player ever, even though he hasn't won a championship since 2016 when he was able to steal one. I'm sorry, I don't care who you are, what you say. You're not going to defeat the legacy of Michael Jordan until you get to 7 titles. And then maybe you could nullify your mental collapse against the Dallas Mavericks in 2011.
8,000 rebounds, 8,000 assists. It's insane, bro. Like, I mean, how far do we have? Like, what more do we have to keep going?
Please keep in mind, Karl Malone has scored more points than Michael Jordan. He's gotten more rebounds than Michael Jordan. No one states that he's greater than Michael Jordan.
As far as whether it's numbers or just ability, Like, at what point do we just say, when?
When he wins more championships.
All right, J.R. Smith saying LeBron passed MJ as the GOAT 2 years ago. Max, how important are these playoffs for the Kings' legacy?
Before Max answers, let me say this. If LeBron James is able to win a championship this season, he would definitely jump ahead of Larry Bird on my list into the top 5 of all time. And I would probably consider putting him above Magic Johnson, if for no other reason that if he were to win a championship this year, I would think that he would have to defeat either Golden State or Houston in the finals with a team of basically cast-offs. So if he were able to win a championship this season, I would have to definitely put him above Larry Bird and consider putting him above Magic Johnson, even with just 4 titles. But I would probably still keep Magic above him.
If the goal is to pass Michael Jordan, which he certainly has not, and by the way, even if he does, it's over a career value, right? Peak value, that ship has sailed. Jordan's peak by every metric, like all the most advanced metrics, higher than LeBron's.
Thank you, sir. Go look up Michael Jordan's statistics from the 87-88 season to the 92-93 season. Look up his stats year after year. In an era where players were not as cognizant of higher metrics as they are today. Every season he was shooting well over 50%, averaging well over 30 points per game.
And LeBron is not getting better in spite of what people say because he can't play defense, throughout the course of the entire season.
Thank you, sir.
So if we're talking about, piling up the accolades and the championships.
Yeah, how come people never do that? How come they don't compare LeBron James's defense at 33 years old to Michael Jordan's defense at 33 years old when he was first team all defense?
Then it's extremely important because LeBron fits into 2 categories right now. And apologies to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's my pick for the second greatest player ever, at least in the modern era, next to Michael Jordan.
Mine's as well. Good job, Max Kellerman.
But I don't think Kareem fits into either one of these categories. The first category is overwhelming, physically dominant superstar who contemporary audiences looked at and said, I'll never see something like that again. That was Wilt Chamberlain and Shaquille O'Neal.
Max Kellerman, you've been watching my videos. Max Kellerman.
Just about. And then LeBron, there's just nothing you can do to stop that guy. He's physically different than everyone else. And then there's another category that LeBron fits into, which is the non-big, the wing player, who is the centerpiece of championship teams, and in his day has some contemporary audiences members thinking that's the greatest ever because there's recency bias, right? Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James. He fits in. I think he's at the top of that category right now. In fact, I think he's on the top.
Well, you'd have to throw in Michael Jordan, sir. Once again, Max Kellerman, you have to make your arguments make sense. You can't say that he's at the top of the category of all-time great wings and then say that he's below Michael Jordan when Michael Jordan was a wing. How do we know that? Because Max Kellerman included Kobe Bryant in that list, and Kobe Bryant, as we all know, is Michael Jordan light. I had one of Kobe Bryant's superfans come on one of my videos and state that Kobe Bryant was Michael Jordan with a 3-point shot. No, actually he wasn't. Kobe Bryant was Michael Jordan if Michael Jordan had small hands, was about a step slower in his first step, had more overrated defense, and was a far lesser decision maker. Then you have Kobe Bryant. And that just goes to show you how great Michael Jordan was, that you could create those deficiencies in him, smaller hands, slower first step, worse decision making, more overrated defense, and he could still be a top 15 all-time great player like Kobe Bryant was.
In the top of that category and the one with Wilt and Shaq. And the fact is that recency bias really applies because in Bird and Magic's day, there were people saying Larry Bird was the greatest player ever. Clearly that wasn't true, but a lot of people thought maybe he is.
Through 1986, you could certainly make that case. Bill Russell was one of the people who said that he thought that Larry Bird might have been the greatest player of all time through that time period. People forget, from the time that Larry Bird was drafted in 1979, he was no lower than the 3rd best player in the NBA. Like in his first season, he took a team that had won something like 28 or 29 games the season before and led them to a 60-win season with no change in their roster. That's another thing. A lot of people don't understand. They didn't get Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish until the next season. It wasn't until the next season that they got those guys and won the championship. He was no lower than probably the third best player in the NBA from his first year in the NBA. I mean, maybe you could say fourth, because the top three players when Bird first came into the NBA, people would most likely say Kareem, Moses Malone, and Dr. J, and then Bird. And then over the course of the early 80s, Bird would fluctuate in that top four. But by 84, he was considered the best player in the NBA, and he was considered that for the next 3 seasons because he won the MVP award. 1987 and 88, he was considered no lower than probably the second best player in the NBA, because Jordan was emerging and was putting up great individual stats. But even in the year that Jordan won the MVP, his first MVP award in 1988, Bird finished second, I believe, in MVP voting. So there is certainly a lot of empirical data to prove that it was reasonable at the time to believe that Larry Bird was a realistic choice as possibly being the greatest player in NBA history up to that time.
Same thing with Kobe Bryant. Also clearly not true, but a lot of people thought he was. A ton of people thought Wilt Chamberlain was, but he lacked the championships.
Well, Wilt Chamberlain is not the greatest NBA player ever. He's the most dominant. Wilt Chamberlain is arguably the most dominant athlete of the 20th century.
So, what you do has to transcend the generations in order to retain your place in that debate with Jordan as the GOAT. Otherwise, the stuff starts to fade, and you start being compared, Stephen A., to the career accomplishments of guys like Kareem and Wilt and Bill Russell, who won all the championships, and Magic and Bird in their day. They'll have their acolytes, and so all of this stuff matters. If you're chasing Jordan, you have to keep piling up the championship appearances, do everything in your power to separate yourself from the rest of the pack.
Well, I think the moment has arrived where we have to be fair, even more so to LeBron James in this respect.
I think that you guys have been more than fair to LeBron James. I think, as a matter of fact, that you've been overly deferential, especially due to the fact that he only has 3 titles. I mean, that's the bottom line of it. He has 3 titles, and he is physically supreme over everyone else in the league. Jordan was not physically supreme over everyone else in his era. That's what makes his accomplishments even greater.
We're holding on to the past. It's a bit difficult for us to transition to a new era. LeBron James is clearly the greatest of this era. There's no denying that. I believe when all is said and done, he belongs on the Mount Rushmore of basketball. He's just that phenomenal, that great.
There are only 4 faces on Mount Rushmore, Stephen A. Smith. Please remember that. But then again, as we've already seen in the previous video, neither one of these two have any regard for Magic Johnson and Larry Bird when it comes to them being evaluated in comparison to LeBron James. They both believe that LeBron James has jumped over the both of them already.
We can't take anything away from him. Here's what I want everyone to understand that I hold not against LeBron, but for Jordan in favor of LeBron, because I have nothing against LeBron. LeBron did not show up in that finals against Dallas.
No, sir. No, sir. Not showing up is what Kobe Bryant did in 2004. That's not showing up. What LeBron James did, that was a travesty. That was the biggest choke job of any all-time great athlete in any sport in championship level history. Period. Bottom line, point blank.
LeBron and his performance against Boston when he ripped off his shirt and walked off the court for one last time as a Cavalier initially. LeBron in the series against the Spurs the second go round, even though it really wasn't his fault because D. Wade was hurt, etc., etc.
He was not good in that series no matter what Shannon Sharp tells you about his stats. In 2013, he wasn't even that good until the second half of Game 6. The first 5 games, LeBron James was not playing well in the 2013 finals.
We look at LeBron. I hold last year against LeBron. And I'll tell you why. as much of a juggernaut as the Golden State Warriors are, whether it was Barkley with Dan Marley and Kevin Johnson, we forget him and how potent he was in Phoenix. Whether it was Seattle with Sean Kemp before he became Sean Klump and Gary Payton the glove.
Yeah, that was an embarrassment. A lot of people who were not around during that era, they don't realize how much that lockout in 1998 affected many of the NBA's most prominent stars from the 90s. I really thought that the Utah Jazz were going to win the championship in the 1998-99 strike-shortened season, or lockout-shortened season, because they were one of the few teams that came back into the season in shape. Players like Patrick Ewing and Sean Kemp, those guys came back 30, 40 pounds overweight. It was unbelievable. And Sean Kemp was never the same after that. He was never the same after that. Damn shame.
It was, that one of those teams, or even Portland to a lesser degree, with Drexler and Porter and Kersey, and the list goes on and on. There were times where you could make a legitimate argument that collectively a team may have been better than the Chicago Bulls.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And many people don't realize that. I've had people come on my channel talking about Jordan was the favorite to win every finals. That is not true. The Chicago Bulls were not the favorite to win every finals. I don't even have the odds in front of me, but I know for a fact that they were the underdogs against the Utah Jazz in 1998. I know that for a fact. I'm not sure about the other finals odds, but I know for a fact in 1998 they were not the favorites. I'm sure in 96 and 97 they were the favorites, because in 96, of course, they won 72 games. In 97, they had won 69 games, and the Utah Jazz had won 64. So I'm sure that they were the favorites in those two. In regards to from 91 to 93, I'm sure that they were the favorites in 92 over Portland. 93, I'm not sure, because Phoenix had more wins than them in the regular season, and Phoenix had actually beaten them in Chicago, even though Chicago had beaten Phoenix in Phoenix during the regular season. The 91 finals against Magic, I'm not sure. If any of you brothers can provide a link for what the odds were for the NBA finals year by year, I would appreciate that. But it is certainly a myth and another form of folklore to promote the propaganda for LeBron James that he's faced all these super teams that he had no chance against, while Michael Jordan had cakewalks in the finals. A lot of that is being mass-produced by the modern liberal sports media to help promote LeBron James over Jordan for whatever reason.
But they didn't have MJ. They didn't have MJ. A guy that was an assassin personified, that had that killer instinct. A killer instinct that he came into the league with, that it took LeBron more than a decade to develop. Those are the kind of things that I pay attention to. And so if we're looking at LeBron and we're saying physically as an individual talent, being about 3 inches taller than Jordan, about 40 pounds heavier than Jordan, being able to handle the ball and be that point forward the way that he was in terms of individual skill, well, you might have a point, because again, Michael Jordan was just, he was an incredible defensive player, but he was a scorer that averaged better than 30 8 times in his career, has a career average of over 30, and still managed 5 and 6 in the assistant rebounding category. But for me, what resonates profoundly, what I can't let go of, what I will never give LeBron the edge over Jordan for, is the fact that LeBron developed an assassin's mentality that the MJs and the Kobes of the world automatically have. And if I'm going to compare you to Jordan, I have to hold that against you, or at least hold that in favor of Jordan, because Jordan's not playing any longer. If Jordan were playing, it would be different. But because Jordan was from a different era, and he didn't play when LeBron played, if we're going to compare him to Jordan, then we have a right to look at the totality of your career, the moments that you didn't show up when Jordan did.
Yes, and the intangibles. I understand that, Stephen A. Smith. But you have to be very careful when you start talking about the quote-unquote assassin persona, because you have other players who played in the NBA who I would put above LeBron that I would not consider quote-unquote assassins. Like, I wouldn't consider Kareem an assassin. I wouldn't consider Magic Johnson necessarily an assassin. He was able to develop that mentality later on. Now, some people might say, well, what about Magic's performance in Game 6 of the 1980 finals. Well, you could say that, but that was more of an all-time great performance. It wasn't like it was the fourth quarter and they were down by 3 with 4 minutes left and Magic just took over and scored 12 of the last 15 points or something like that. So, different players have different psyches. To me, what I concentrate more on with LeBron is the performance against the Dallas Mavericks in 2011. That's the main thing for me, and the fact that he's 3-5 in the finals. If you're supposed to be the all-time greatest player, you can't be 3-5 in the finals, period.
The fact that there was never a question that Jordan would show up, that he had the assassin's mentality, and oh, by the way, he played at a time where Max, from a physicality standpoint, he was actually an underdog from the position of getting beat up, Jordan rules being implemented by the bad boy Pistons.
And by the 1990s, New York Knicks, Indiana Pacers, and Miami Heat.
The level of physicality that was allowed. LeBron is bigger and stronger than everybody, but also playing in an era where you could get teed up for having bad breath. So he's playing when the game is softer,
by the way,
while he's bigger and stronger. And Jordan was smaller, not bigger and stronger. The era was tougher, and he still did what he did. And oh, by the way, Max, Jordan, if he had retired, wouldn't he have gone to 8 straight NBA finals?
Well, a lot of that is hypothetical. We don't even have to go into hypothetical arguments, Stephen A. Smith. We could just deal with what the actualities are. The actualities are that Michael Jordan is 6 for 6 in the NBA Finals. He has 6 MVPs. As Max Kellerman has already stated, his peak was higher than LeBron James's peak. We know that LeBron is going to have a renaissance in his 30s for the simple fact that he's privy to having access to far higher levels of performance-enhancing drugs, allegedly. And as Stephen A. has stated, the NBA game today is far more wide open. So for a player with a very high basketball IQ like LeBron, he'll be able to feast on teams today because he can drive the lane, get a lot of layups. At the end of the season, he's going to have a lot of higher level metrics that will be through the roof. 58% true shooting percentages and 54% shooting percentages from the field, things of that nature that LeBron is very cognizant and aware of.
One could argue that.
Yeah, of course, we all believe that. Yeah, listen, no, we all believe that. There are a couple things. One, I don't buy the argument that because LeBron is bigger and stronger, you take credit away. Sometimes I hear you make that comment like,
no,
LeBron
the era.
Harden, LeBron is 6'8", 260. But I mean, just like if you're taller and closer to the hoop, that makes you a better player in the NBA usually. So like that's still.
Well, it gives you an advantage. It doesn't necessarily make you a better player. It gives you a certain advantage that is only relevant if you work on it well enough and for long enough to maximize it, to make it optimal.
To LeBron's credit, what I will say is this. The first thing is, Michael Jordan, when people talk about the teams he played and he never had to go up against the Warriors, that is true. But you brought up that Sonics team. When the Bulls won 72 games, went 72-10, the previous year, because Jordan came back later in the season, he didn't have his legs, and they lost in the playoffs, the Orlando Magic went to the finals with Shaq and Penny. People thought, oh my God, here comes the clash of the Titans.
Very
they won
young Shaq
60,
and Penny.
They won, okay, but they won 60 games that season the Bulls won 72, and they had just come from a finals trip, and Jordan swept them.
Absolutely. Good job, Max Kellerman. Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in 1996, they did sweep the Orlando Magic with Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal. Extremely talented team, but they couldn't get out of their own way. That team was almost too talented. And had they all been maybe 4 years older, they may have been championship ready. But they were a little bit too precocious to beat a team like Chicago. In 1995, as we all know, the Orlando Magic were able to beat the Chicago Bulls in 6 games. And when you look at that series, the reason why the Bulls lost that series, even with no Rodman and really no experience playing together with Michael Jordan, the main reason why they lost that series was because Jordan was not in condition to finish games strong. In Game 1, he got stripped by Nick Anderson down the stretch of the game where he was clearly tired. Game 3, and I'm going off memory. I remember watching these games. In Game 3, he scored something like 31 points or 33 points in the first half in Chicago. In the second half, he only scored about 6 or 7 points. In Game 5, Jordan came out strong again. I think he ended with something like 38 or 39 points in the game. But Orlando finished strong at the end, and in Game 6, they had a big lead, and they choked that away as well because of fatigue by Michael Jordan. All those losses came from fatigue, and that's why conditioning is so important. And Jordan himself would tell you that he choked away many of those games in the 1995 playoffs because of his conditioning. It wasn't a mental thing, and a lot of people have a hard time trying to understand why people talk about the 2011 finals so much. Once again, there has never been a championship level performance by an all-time great player where seemingly they were so detached and had disassociated so much from their environment and the moment where they literally looked like a deer in headlights. Like, I get a lot of these cats, well, Larry Bird had a couple of games in the NBA Finals where he only scored 8 points. Yeah, but they won. You can't compare performances in a victory to performances in a loss, man. It's like if you watch a Super Bowl and Tom Brady goes 12 for 27 and he only throws for 170 yards and they win the Super Bowl 37-14. Nobody cares. But if he goes 12 for 27 and they lose 37-14, we're hearing what? Tom Brady choked. Why is that? Because the scenario of the game, the condition of the game, is going to predetermine what you expect from your great stars, from your great performers. Bottom line. Okay? So in 1995, the Bulls met a very precocious Orlando Magic team that were not really ready to go to the finals. Had there been a team in the East that was transcendent and experienced, they would have lost. But the Orlando Magic in 95, they had so much talent. That team was so unbelievably talented, and I don't care what anybody says. Before Penny Hardaway got hurt, he was better than Kobe Bryant. The Penny Hardaway in the mid-90s before he was hurt was better than the Kobe of the early 2000s. I don't care what anybody says in regards to his ability to elevate a team. Like, they had no coach. Brian Hill wasn't a real coach, and they still won 60 games in 1996. And Shaq had missed a lot of time that year because he was already starting to act like a bitch and get jealous over a lot of the acclaim that Penny Hardaway was getting. He missed a lot of time, and Penny had stretches in that season where he was dominant. I mean, he was just unbelievable that year. And he had to reel it back when Shaq came back. When Shaq left, Penny was trying to take over the team, but he had a lot of debilitating knee issues, unfortunately.
And then he played a 63-win Sonics team.
64 win.
And beat them in 6 games. No one ever took him 7 games in the finals. So there is that. Then you talk about, holding stuff against LeBron. Look, I know what it must seem like to a younger generation. Guys, it's ridiculous. No matter what LeBron does, if he's not perfect, then he's not Jordan. Yeah, Jordan set a standard of near perfection. And
I agree. When Michael Jordan had the opportunity to make sure that his body was in condition, you cannot find any series in the playoffs where you could say Jordan came up small here mentally. He choked mentally. Now, if you're just not in shape, you're not in shape. He came back with 17 games left in the regular season in 1995. One can say that he should have taken a far longer time to do so, but I think that he was just so thirsty to get back on the court that he didn't give a shit. So he basically set himself up for failure down the line. It was amazing that he had some of the performances that he had basically coming in off the street. But to have a mental detachment like LeBron James had in 2011, mentally unforgivable. Unforgivable.
And it's an incredibly high standard, and just because LeBron's the best you've ever seen does not mean he's the best of all time. In fact, the arguments against Jordan, including, well, he had to learn how to beat the Pistons, are nonsense. The first time that Jordan had another all-star on his team was when Scottie Pippen first became an all-star. He took the Pistons 7 games, and only because Pippen had a migraine and didn't play in Game 7 did they not beat the Pistons in those 7 games, in my opinion.
Well, in 1990, Game 7 was in Detroit. So that's speculative as to whether or not they would have beat the Pistons in Game 7. They had 3 other chances to win in Detroit, and they had failed thus far. So I'm going to leave that alone. The Bad Boy Pistons were an all-time great team. But according to Pippen, by his own words, he couldn't answer the bell. Those were his words.
The next year, you could see Pippen's play jumped up, and the statistics all reflect that. he became a prime Pippen. As soon as Jordan had a prime Pippen, in other words, one other truly great player, he never didn't win the finals again in under 7 games. So the idea that, well, Jordan had to learn and struggle very, very early in his career, when, by the way, he was putting up crazy numbers and killing everyone in the playoffs, just didn't have a team around him. Once he hit his stride and they gave him even one other truly great player, it was a wrap for everyone in the league. Karl Malone and John Stockton, Shaquille O'Neal, Hakeem Olajuwon, Drexler. It didn't matter who you weren't getting anything when Jordan was around.
Well, we really can't say that about Hakeem Olajuwon because they never got a chance to play the Houston Rockets in the finals. And to be quite frank with you, they didn't match up very well with the Rockets because Hakeem was so skilled. Jordan has Hakeem Olajuwon in his all-time greatest lineup. If I remember correctly, I think Jordan has Hakeem at center over Kareem, over Bill Russell, over all those guys. So there's a great deal of respect between those two players, as there should be. Hakeem Olajuwon is the most skilled center I've ever seen play. He was doing things that you see Jokic and Embiid and Anthony Davis doing now. He was doing that 30 years ago.
Okay, so what I take away from this, there's levels to this, and it's still the GOAT and everybody else. Still to come.
But anyway, that's it on that. We all know what J.R. Smith's ramblings were actually about. He has to make sure that he stays in the NBA. He also has to make sure that LeBron James is in a good mental frame of mind going into the playoffs. We know that it's all bullshit, but it's good publicity for LeBron's media outlet Uninterrupted. But anyway, peace.